This is The Edge. I'm Eric Bolling, former professional baseball player, Wall Street commodities trader, the guy who helped launch The Five on Fox News, and a man who's been knocked down hard, time and time again. Too many times to list, but I always found a way to stand back up every single time. This show isn't about safe spaces or participation trophies. It's about what it takes to thrive when everything is on the line. All right, for the first guest, of course, The Edge wants someone with grit, with resilience, with perseverance. Who else than the Hall of Fame quarterback, Brett Favre, who spent 20 years in the NFL. 16 of those years, he started every single game. You get in there, and not your first pass, your first big hit. And do you remember where it was and who did it?
I think the first time I actually was hurt, I was still walk as a quarterback, especially in that era. It wasn't like common to be hit, whether it be late, early, on time, didn't matter. You were going to get hit. But the first really where I went, oh shit, that was, of all people, Reggie White. It was my second year as a starter. We played Philadelphia in Milwaukee. It was the last year that Packers were going to play three home games in Milwaukee. And that was, I think, the first of that year. Reggie was with Philadelphia. They were loaded with veteran, good, just really good players. McMahon was on that team. Herschel Walker was on that team. Their defense was stacked. And, I was intimidated. When I looked across from me and saw Reggie White, the greatest defensive player, arguably, in history, he was 6'5", 330, and ran like a deer, could hurdle any blocker that tried to cut him. Well, he hurdled one of our blockers and picked me up and pile drive me into my left shoulder. And that was kind of an aha moment. I ended up finishing the game. I got ejected at halftime. We came back and beat them. But it was like, welcome to the big boys.
Tito Ortiz. Well, he's not just a fighter. He's a man who dragged himself out of the dirt into the spotlight and then back into the fire again. Tito Ortiz lived the kind of life most people only talk about: pressure, chaos, legacy, heartbreak, comebacks.
Hey, Data White relationship goes out because you guys you were the top of the top of the USC. He was there, and then next you know there's a problem. What happened? I think it was after the Ken Shamrock fight, the first one. I realized, they're selling out 15,000 seat arenas, pay-per-view buys, a couple 100,000 pay-per-view buys, and I was making $100,000 again, and they're making 30 million, 40 million. Yeah, not that time. They're making about 15, but still at the same time, I watch boxers and they're making 20 million, 10 million, 5 million. I was like, what am I doing good? They're doing. I'm doing the entertainment value. I'm doing all the interviews for free. I'm traveling for free. I'm doing all this free work for you guys, but I'm blowing up with my life on the line. I'm not going to be able to do this the rest of my life. UFC's never around forever. And they've grown bigger and bigger. I mean, they sold the company for $4.5 billion. Then they turned back around and they sold their rights to Paramount for $7.7 billion. For me to have to be a blue-collar guy right now, I shouldn't have to. I should, as you said earlier, I should have fucking.
He was the original high-stakes risk taker, a man who built a total empire, lost it all, and clawed his way back from the ashes. Wall Street loved him. Hollywood made him a legend, but the truth is even wilder. On The Edge today, the real wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort. I don't think anyone in my world epitomizes that resilience than you, sir, right there. What do you attribute that strength of getting back up after you get knocked down so many times? Where did that come from?
I think it comes from different places at different times. So I think, at its very core, I think there was a belief I had that I had what it takes to be massively successful. I never lost that self-belief. And I think if you don't have that belief, you think, oh my God, it's over. I screwed up, my reputation. What am I going to do? People aren't going to accept me. How am I going to make money again? You can very quickly talk yourself into a mindset of inaction, of negativity, of everything that would stop you from coming back from a massive fall. So I think it really starts with self-belief. And in my mind, I was like able, and obviously I was devastated. Of course, I lost everything, right? Not just financially, my reputation, my family for a time, my wife left, everything, right? Hit the absolute bottom, right? But in my own mind, I said, I definitely possess the requisite skills to be incredibly wealthy. I'm a master salesman. I can train salespeople. And as long as you know how to close, you'll always make money. So and in my mind, I never really thought that I would have an issue with money. Whether I got back to massive sums of wealth or just being rich, okay, I always knew I'd be wealthy. That was part of it. I think that's really important, by the way, because I was able to look and say, okay, I made huge errors. What were those errors? What was wrong with my values? Was I focused too much on instant gratification? Yes. Okay. Did I lose my moral compass? Yes, but how? I was able to get much more granular at what I had done wrong, what I had done right. And then at the heart of it all, the why of it all really was the love of my children. I had 2 children. I was in jail and I had, just devastated them. I had to tell them I was going to jail. And then my love of my kids, whenever I felt like I couldn't go on, and I will tell you that was many nights. It's not like, oh, yeah, I'm just strong. No, there's many nights where you question, especially in jail, when I was teaching myself how to write. And I wrote the book, The Wolf of Wall Street, right? And it was like this idea that I was going to come back and show my children that their dad was a good man, could do it right, and be a role model to them. And that was really the why that essentially drove.
Let's put it this way. Some men play it safe. Some men change the horizon, so to speak. Gil Dezer, well, he found his edge. Get this, building towers that most wouldn't dare attempt.
Meeting the Porsche guys was after we did the buildings with our president Donald Trump. I did 6 Trump branded buildings in Miami, and I became the guy who understands how to really incorporate brands into the real estate. And when we sat there and said, well, what does Porsche have to do with real estate? And he said, well, let's make the building a little bit about the car lover, and also solve a big problem in apartments in Miami. The biggest problem that we solved was parking. We said, the guy loves his car as much as we do, and he sees it as a piece of art. Well, then he might want it in his living room. So we came up with a car lift system. And we when they asked me, what do you want to call this car lift system? I call it, well, it's the Deservator. And so calling the Deservator was something that kind of caught on. But really what it is, you drive your car into the elevator, takes you up to your level and places you right outside your apartment. So, and people who love their cars as much as they love art, and they have it right there next to their units, they fell in love with the idea, and we built the Porsche Tower, humongous success, only 132 units, and so now we're doing the 2.0, if you will, where all the minor mistakes we would have made in Porsche, we actually blew them away this time in the Bentley Tower in 2.0. So that's how we got into the car branded building. I also worked with Giorgio Armani. I built the Armani Casa in Miami. And as well as we're working with Baccarat Tower, it's also happening in downtown Miami. So, and we're the brand guys in South Florida.
Some men wait for motivation. Others build systems so strong, motivation really becomes irrelevant. Manning Sumner isn't a fitness influencer. He's an architect of discipline. From the gym floor to global brand deals, he's built one of the most respected performance cultures in America. What's a good workout for someone that maybe wants to up their game?
Well, a good workout is the workout. And what I mean by that is consistency is everything. So if you're not doing something almost every single day, then you're not gonna, consistency compounds over time. And I think everybody nowadays wants that quick, instant gratification. Oh, I'm gonna do some crazy 30-day diet and, work out 3 hours a day, and then I'm gonna get the body of my dreams. And it really, you should look at it as like working out should be like taking a shower. Like, why are we looking at working? Working out is not a punishment. It's not something I have to do.
How do you change that, though? How do you change it from this is hard, this makes me ache while I do it, it hurts, it burns, to this feels good.
You change it by doing it. It's in the doing, it's in the taking the action of showing up. It's in the movement that creates the motivation. I think oftentimes we sit and we wait to be motivated, and there is no motivation in waiting. There's only motivation in movement. So it's funny. I still get it. I'm sure you get it too. We don't always show up to the gym ready. But as soon as you get into it, and as soon as you get into that fourth set, and and I heard a woman actually talking about it, that our muscles actually give off these like proteins, like when we work out, that are like antidepressants. So
endorphins.
She obviously described
Some
it way
people,
better than I did.
Some people get a runner's high from running.
Yeah,
Some
running.
people get
Exactly. But I think it's, again, it goes back to the movement. It's moving the body. And so if you don't feel like lifting weights, go for a walk. If you don't feel like running, then crawl. Like just move.
Just a story of a man who's been through the fire and rebuilt himself. Anthony Scaramucci, Wall Street veteran, hedge fund founder, survivor of the spotlight. This episode isn't about the White House. It's about what happens after the big fall. How do you come back when the world thinks you're done? Pivotal moment that you remember. I can name 2 or 3, once in baseball, a couple times in Wall Street, and certainly once on television. Is there one moment where it could have gone either way? And maybe it did go sideways for you, but tell us that one moment that sticks in your mind.
Well, there's a couple moments. I mean, the first job I had, I was in investment banking at Goldman, and I sucked at that job. I was able to convince people to hire me, and it worked out for me in the beginning, but then they went into a recession. Since I wasn't really that good at the job, they fired me. So there I was, 27 years old, lots of school debt, fired from my first job, having graduated from Harvard Law School. It was very demoralizing, really impacted my self-esteem. And then I got a new job at Goldman, which was even funnier that happened. But the secondary job, Eric, was the one where I was in asset management and sort of wealth management, and things did well. We were also in a bull market. You know this. You have to stay humble. Don't confuse brains with a bull market, which we were living in. And so I wrote down in my diary after my firing, I said, okay, I have to start my own business so I can control my own destiny, so that if someone's going to fire me, it'd have to be 100 clients or 1,000 clients or whatever. And so I wrote in my book, if I could make enough money to pay off my school debt and I would start my new business debt-free, I would do that. And so you remember Goldman. The fiscal year ended in December. November 30th was the end of the year. I paid off the debt on Memorial Day weekend, 1996. I left on December 1st, the end of Goldman's year, to start my business. And, thankfully, Eric, I was in a bull market. You remember the 90s. 96, 97, 98, these were great years. And I probably made a ton of mistakes, but a rising market tide lifted the boat of the business that we started. I sold it to Neuberger Berman. Neuberger got bought by Lehman. Those were great years for me. And then I went to Dick Fold, who was the CEO of Lehman, Michael Dell, the computer entrepreneur, and a few others. I want to start another business. I formed Skybridge, but you know why I ended up on your television set? Another disaster. We were getting killed in the global financial crisis. The first time I did television was the 17th of March, 2009. You were hosting the show. And why did I come on the show? I wanted to talk about the SALT conference, which I was hosting in May of 2009, because I wanted to let people know that we're still in business. Eric Bowen's going to give me an opportunity to give my opinion about why people shouldn't fire us and why the future could be bright post-crisis, and how our conference business was going to be a good idea to come to, and so on and so forth. And we survived it. And so what is the edge? Sometimes the edge is getting your ass up out of bed and going forward. The edge is what Eric is describing. He's gotten his ass kicked in the oil pit. He's got the cover over his head, but he's got to take the cover off his head and get up and go forward. You've got to go forward.
And a reminder to every one of you, the same mindset that wins on the world stage wins in your own life. Stand firm, take the hit, come back stronger. That's how you thrive on the edge. I'm Eric Bolling. This is The Edge. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And I'll see you right here next week where the fire gets even hotter. Stay strong, folks.